P, and I'm now moderating this next panel. Thank you for your patience. We are a bit late. We have a bit more time because there is no event after this, but we also know that you will be going to other events. So we try to do 35 to 40 minutes. And please, I'm asking the panel to come to the stage, and I will introduce you when we sit. And this is a very special panel. So we have free seating. This is not scripted. This is blue sky, we think, and we are here together. Please, Nathalie, Bayo. Thank you for joining us, and thank you also for those who will be still coming, because we know the doors were closed and people are trickling in. So, blue sky. We are talking today about nothing else but reimagining global cooperation, inclusive development in a reordered world. This is the second time that we do this format, because we have heard today there is no time to act. The development minister has said, let's stop talking and let's get to work. Our UNDP administrator said, we must believe, we must convene, we must act. We have solutions that we are waiting for. We have the DSG, the Deputy Secretary General, who said what it means to be human in the age of AI. We had her also speaking about constructive discomfort, and we had the president of the Asian Development Bank who said we are at a critical juncture of human being. So what does all of that mean? Acting, get to work now, no time left. We here think that it's also important to take a step back and to think about how we can reimagine a different future with a very distinguished panel that comes from very different directions, and that we take the time before we act to see what we act upon and how we think about these challenges where we have no time to lose. And that is why I'm so happy that all of you are here. And all of you take 40 minutes. We have some 35 to 40 minutes to dare to imagine with us how we can rethink this inclusive development in a reordered world. So we have here a distinguished panel that I will introduce. And I'm delighted first to introduce Bayo Akomolafe, who invites us to rethink our deepest assumptions about society, about identity, and about progress. His perspective challenges us to imagine radically different futures beyond today's categories. And he brings a background as a philosopher, a writer, an activist, a professor of psychology, and an executive director of the Emergence Network. Between Bayo and me, we have Nathalie Tocci, who brings the geopolitical and the governance perspective. She explores how political leadership, institutions, and international cooperation can navigate in an increasingly fragmented work. She's a professor of practice at Johns Hopkins and formerly the director of the Istituto Affari Internazionali in Rome. Thank you, Nathalie, for coming here. And we have Minh-Thu Pham, who contributes on development and partnership. She has a long career and focuses on how countries, institutions, and partners can build practical forms of cooperation that enable inclusive development. She is the co-founder and CEO of the Starling Institute in New York, and she has been a trusted and long-term advisor to many multilateral processes, to a former UN Secretary General, and she has shaped many of these multilateral processes. So thank you also for coming from New York. But as this is a different session, we want to start. Bayo will kick us off. He will kick us off with obviously answering a question that I will pose to him. But first, he has a way of opening conferences, meetings, and interventions and lectures that brings what he has from this psychological perspective, from the perspective to go back to who we are as humans into the room. So Bayo, before I ask you a question, I ask you to do this magic that we get from the action into this context of thinking differently.
Thank you, sister. May I stand for this one?
You do
Okay.
whatever you want.
All right, all right. My sister here a while ago said, I would like you to disrupt things a little. And I asked myself, what does it mean when disruption is part of the program? Right? Is that really disruptive? But I'm going to try something with us today. This is not a magic trick. This is not to entertain you. I'm just going to ask everyone here to look around the room, not at the people, at the room. So if you will, just look at the room and take it in. We've already heard some, voices suggest to us that it's a beautiful room. But take it in for a while. Look at the golden faces, the crests. Some of those faces are frozen in surprise, in anxiety. Some of the walls are garlanded with crests and symbols. It exudes importance, right? You're in the room and your back is straight. It teaches you to understand power, right? We're in a powerful place, right? This is what the room does. Right? This room was built 1841. 1841. The next year, 1842, there was a great fire in Hamburg. I'm sure some of you know the history. And the city merchants rushed to save one building. The rest of the city was burned to ashes, but one building stood strong, this one. Even then, they understood how power works, right? So the city merchants came here and they saved it. This building is a form of trauma. It's a form of captured power. I asked myself immediately, I sat down on that seat right there, what gods are convening us here as we ask questions about genocide and the Anthropocene? What gods have brought us here? What are we actually serving? Did you notice that when our brother, the chief economist, was on stage, everyone was drifting outside of the room because the avatars of power had left the room, because the room is not actually convened for inquiry. It's convened around power. So we're going to say a lot of nice things here at this conference. But I wonder, for the sake of the people that I represent, for the sake of the worlds that I'm interested in, if there are other ways to be here in this place and at this time. If we can get around the seriousness of our suits, right? The business suit is the uniform of the Anthropocene, right? If we can get around the seriousness and the formality of the moment to literally and metaphysically and civilizationally and spiritually host space for what wants to come into this room through the traumatic geometries of this room. If we can do that, I would be pleased beyond measure. But it's not about my pleasure. So let's do something, one thing to get us started. If you can, please rise to your feet. If you can only. If you can, rise to your feet. I want to ask you to do something as a ritual to get us started. I should say that this must not move or leave this room. This is a very secret thing, okay? If you mention it outside of this room, you might die. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You know I'm kidding. But here's what we're going to do. If you can, go to 3 or 4 people. Don't mind how smooth and formal and significant and important they look. Go to them all the same and hug them so tight and say, we're here to do some kind of work. We don't know what it is yet, but I'm hugging you to initiate you into a deeper form of inquiry, a fugitive kind of arrangement, so we can be available for different kinds of work that the world is inviting us to do right now. 3 people, not 4, okay? 4 people, you will die. 3 people is okay. All right, let's go. Let's be like children and play. Break beyond the formalities of uniformity and importance. Good, good, good. Okay.
Thank you so much. This was great, and I already see the energy in the room changing and people opening up and connecting. And that's what we will do now. We will connect, and we will connect to your ideas, Bayo. And we need to bring this element of humanity and people being in rooms into this so that we can reimagining what is the future. So my question to you, Bayo, that is a bit more traditional now. So we will go into the panel. What new paradigm of global cooperation do you believe humanity needs now? And what fundamental assumptions should we leave behind?
Right. Thank you very much. How did that feel, folks? Did that feel good? Just raise your hands in the air, wave them like you just don't. There you go. Nice. That's all the rap I know. I want to start with a provocation. It's something I utter all the time. Well, two things, actually. The first is the times are urgent. Let us slow down. And that is an invitation to notice. I heard some phrases here today, like the world is in crisis. There's AI, there's pandemics, there's genocide. We need to speed things up. And that's the metaphysics of progress. The idea that we can situate every people, every country, every tribe and culture on a spectrum of urgency. And if we situate them, then it's all a matter of getting faster, putting in more capital, developing faster, but something is always left behind when we situate the world that way. In fact, I would argue that that form of infrastructure, that metaphysical infrastructure that presupposes that the world can be put in a single linearity, a single time flow that moves forward, that very metaphysics is at the heart of the Anthropocene. It's what gave birth to the Hanseatic League. It's what gave birth to the transatlantic slave trade, right? It's what gave birth to slaveholding societies, the idea that we can build hierarchies of socialities and build worlds in our image. The second thing that I would like to say is, what if, it's a question, what if the way we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis? What if the ways that we're convening ourselves, what if the rituals, the silent neurotypical gestures, right, that we repeat with each other, between us, the ways we exchange email IDs, the way we dress in the morning, the things we tell ourselves in front of the mirrors before we appear before important places like this. Like, what if those tiny things come together and convene this aesthetic, this firmament, this world that centralizes us and decentralizes the world? I would say, sister, that we are trying to save the world, but something about saving the world renders the world eminently disposable. It renders it eminently instrumental. I'm tired of conversations that put us in the forefront, right? We speak a good game with uncertainty. We're in times of uncertainty, but we double down, not listening to what the world seems to be inviting us to stay with. The troubles of our time will not be solved by easy mastery or more capital or more philanthropy or more foundations. And that's why I feel the way isn't forward any longer. The way is awkward. And the reason why I wanted us to start with a high five or with a hug is to break ourselves out of the monotony of presence that presupposes that we are the ones to save the day.
You took us out of this monotony, and thank you for inviting us to rethink that. And what came to my mind before I go to Nathalie is, you said something is left behind. We are here at a conference to look at the SDGs, to follow the Agenda 2030. And it says, we leave no one behind. That's the motto of the SDGs of the Agenda 2030. But maybe we forgot also that there is something, and that's what you say with this concept of the world, that there's something left behind. It's not only us. So that we see maybe, and we are coming to 2030, so maybe we need to also think what that means, what you say so that something is left behind that helps us to think in that post-2030. So thank you for that. And with that, I move to Nathalie. Nathalie, how can international cooperation evolve in a world where power is becoming more distributed and the old order is fading? Was there ever a consensus on the old order? And what does that mean for us looking into the future?
Well, thank you so much for this. And it's really difficult to take your cue because, I mean, boy, I mean, that was just amazing. Let's just give him a hand again. So I don't think we should spend too much time on talking about the old order, because I think if there's one point of consensus is not whether it was good or bad, but that it's over. And so there's little point in talking about something which is over. I do think that it's more interesting because there's a great deal more of uncertainty talking about, and therefore what comes next. And not only I think it's more interesting because there's more uncertainty, but also because if we imagine the various futures, I think we can also say, firstly, that each one of them, it's very unlikely that we're simply going to head in one direction, right? And so although these different futures are actually apparently mutually incompatible, actually what we end up seeing is that they will coexist. And what makes it even more interesting is that there are aspects within each one of these different scenarios which is catastrophic potentially, but also incredibly constructive, right? And so holding all this in our little heads is not easy. Now, what are these possible scenarios? There is one scenario which says, well, if there was an order before, good or bad, an alternative scenario is simply that there is no order, right? So it's basically a world of disorder. Now, obviously, there are all sorts of terrible things that stem from disorder, from war, and war which is not, quote unquote, just intrastate war, as typically was the case when we lived in the so-called liberal international order, but war which has become increasingly interstate as well. And even when we're talking about intrastate wars, we have this layering of conflicts which are local, and they're national, and they're regional, and they're global. And at the same time, we have vacuums of power and all sorts of things that end up filling these vacuums. So it is fairly clear that there are all sorts of terribly dangerous things that stem from disorder. But actually, in a recent meeting that Min and I were together at, one of the speakers said something which really lit up my light bulb, and that went something along the lines of, disruption is incredibly creative as well, right? I mean, it is in moments of disruption, historically, that most of the creation has taken place. And actually, you do end up seeing this at this point in time as well. If we're thinking about, for instance, technological progress and the strides forward that this can make in areas like health, in areas like addressing climate change. So within disorder, which apparently is the most catastrophic of the scenarios, and it is in many respects, there's actually also a light within that shadow. A second possible scenario, and I think we're also seeing elements of this, is a world of empires. And what I mean by a world of empires is basically a world in which there are a number of states that no longer understand themselves as states, and that basically violate the very basics of international law, starting from sovereignty and territorial integrity. So they don't simply violate them, they essentially unrecognize them, right? They unrecognize these norms. And obviously when we're in this conversation, we have we talk about Russia and what it's doing in Ukraine, and we talk about Trump's America, and we talk about Xi's China, perhaps slightly less so than we talk about Russia and the United States. But there's certainly a great deal of imperial ambitions, right, being kind of, flouted left, right, and center. Now, again, very, very difficult to look at something positive stemming from this, but I will say one thing. If by a world of empires, we're basically talking about a kind of law of the jungle in which there's a survival of the fittest, in which, the lions at the top of the food chain basically kind of, as the strong, they do as they will, and the suffer will suffer and the weak will suffer what they must. But if you actually look at what has been going on, just think about how, for instance, the world in Ukraine is going. Just think about the recent war in Iran. You basically notice that the strong have not won. It's the weaker that perhaps, exploiting some of their asymmetric advantages are perhaps not winning, but, all a weak needs to do is not to lose, and all of a sudden they've won. And so maybe within this world in which imperial ambitions are resurfacing, there is also a grain of truth which is re-emerging, which is actually the lions as well have something to gain from some degree of rules and norms, and therefore, norms and rules to be reconstituted. And then the third scenario is a scenario which has had, I think, a very interesting evolution. Let's call it the scenario of middle powers. And it has had a very interesting evolution because when we used to talk about middle powers up until January of this year, the conversation went a little bit like this. There's a conflict raging between the global West and the global East, and there's the global South that basically doesn't really want to take sides. And it's a global South that doesn't want to take sides, and it doesn't take sides at times by acting in a very transactional way, by being multi-aligned, by hedging, at times by being a little bit opportunistic, at times even being a little bit more cynical. So particularly in the West, the middle power debate up until this year, basically, had a negative undertone to it. Now, all of a sudden, after Canadian Prime Minister Mike Carney made his speech in Davos this year, we start having a radically different middle power debate. All of a sudden, the middle powers are those that are not the empires, yeah? They are the ones that actually believe in those basic norms and rules in international order. And that they may be democracies, they may be hybrid systems, they may be autocracies, but they all share an interest in maintaining a degree of order. And whether that order is not the old order, but it's a reimagined, it's a revised, it's a reformed, it's a re-energized order, they believe in it. And I think what's interesting, and on this I'll end, is that there are very clearly elements of truth in all of these stories. And I think the challenge, the intellectual challenge, and then of course the political and the policy challenge, is to try and understand how to bring them together.
Oh. Thank you so much. And what a great follow on what Bayo has said. And I think the contradiction, the creativity, the opportunities, but also I think what we often forget is maybe we don't know as much as we think we know. And that was something that when we started this idea of blue sky last year, that we started to begin to analyze together to see where are we in a world where something is broken, something new is not there. And then we got to a question. We had a professor from Nigeria who said, guess what? This old order that was last year in June, everyone was under shock, right? Because we all know what had happened before. She was saying, we were never happy with this order. It has never worked for us. It worked for many, but not for us. And then we got to the point of where does that bring us? And Obviously, 45 minutes were by far not enough, but the discussion today really beautifully continues what we have started last year. And with that, I think, and that's why I said it, framed it like that, Minh-Thu, is because she said, it has never worked for us. And then we come to your perspective, to the development perspective, with your in-depth experience on multilateral processes. I would like to ask you, what would an alternative, a truly inclusive model of development look like in practice? And what do we need to change to make this possible? That we are not going into a new order where we talk about development and capital and all what we've heard this, and then we have a majority of the world that says, but it has not trickled down to us. People also in different countries, it has not trickled down to us. What do we need to change?
Great, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be on this panel, especially following the amazing introduction that Bayo started us off with. And I think starting a meeting, especially one like this with hugs, is always a good thing. So I just want to take a cue from what you just did, which is essentially is to take you through a thought experiment by way of answering your question, Melanie. So let's imagine all of you, and we're talking about a global order, so coming off of Nathalie's comments. Imagine all of you are in a car. You're driving, you're in the driver's seat, and it's bright daylight, and you come to an intersection. And let's just say you're on a country road, you're in a rural setting. So there are no other cars around, but you're at a four-way intersection. And you're driving there, and you look around and you see no cars. But in front of you are two stop signs and a red light that tell you to stop, but there's no one around. You see no cars, there's no police car or anything. What do you do? How many of you would come to a full stop, which is legally what's required? How many of you would speak honestly here? There are no police in this room, I don't think. So speak honestly. How many of you would actually come to a full stop as legally required? Okay, it's about maybe less than a third, maybe a quarter of you. Okay, how many of you might slow down, look again, but probably proceed through? Okay. How many of you would just drive through? It's broad daylight, you see absolutely nothing. You're just gonna drive through. Again, it's flat. There's nothing, you're in a very rural road. Flat, no cars. How many of you would just drive through? Okay, so for those of you who came to a full stop, why is that? I like to ask my students this too. Why do you come to a full stop? And the variety of answers that I get range from, it's the law. I've been taught to be able to get my driver's license. I was taught that when I see a stop sign, when I see a stoplight, I have to stop no matter what. That I'm afraid of getting hit by a car that I can't see. I'm afraid of the consequences. I'm afraid of the consequences of a police officer that I can't see coming through and maybe giving me a fine. I'm afraid there might be a camera that I can't see that will then take a picture and then send me a fine later on. That there are consequences that you're fearful of, including bodily harm, including getting into a car accident. So there are reasons why some people might come to a full stop. Some of those are also reasons why some of you might slow down a little bit because you really don't want to be hurt. But you're okay with maybe, in this situation, bypassing the law a little bit. So when you think about that in the context of the global order and the rules, that was also mentioned on the first, in our opening session today. Do the rules still exist? Do we still need a common set of values and rules? Do we still need, for international cooperation to work, to have a common set of values? And I would say, yes, we do. Because all of you at least recognize the question that I asked you. All of you recognized, if you go to an intersection, you recognize what a stop sign or a red light means. You recognize that if you get to an intersection, you shouldn't potentially drive through. And that even if you do drive through, there's a voice in you that probably says, should I do this? Oh, well, I don't see anything, so I'm just gonna go do it ahead. There's a set of rules, principles that you have internalized that have gotten you to believe that. Now, the problem with the global order so far is that who was the police officer before? Who decided on what the consequences would be if you violated that. If Russia crosses over and invades Ukraine, if the international humanitarian laws are blatantly violated, who then decides to impose consequences? In the past, and up until now, it's largely been a great power. It's not the rules themselves that were the problem. It was the execution and the decisions as to which parties would then have those rules, the consequences imposed on them. Are they a friend? Are they a foe? So when we think about, in terms of a blue sky approach here, when we think about the global order, and then now, in a world where you don't have necessarily one global hegemon deciding on who is going to reinforce those rules, who will be the police officer, who will install the camera, who will impose the consequences, then we're in a world maybe of disorder that Nathalie just raised. So what does that then mean? Right now, if you don't have a global hegemon, and from my perspective, then that means the rest of the world who deeply believe in those rules have to step up. It means that small powers, middle powers, emerging big powers all need to come together to say, for a global order to be ordered, meaning traffic runs the way that it should, that we are able to constrain the behavior of the powerful, we're able to predict and try to shape the behavior of everyone else, that we need alternative ways, alternative rule holders, rule defenders to defend those rules. And that's where I think the opportunity for the rest of the world to step up, to defend those rules, this is the opportunity. So in this moment of chaos, in this moment of rupture, however you want to call it, it gives us an opportunity to think differently about the rules-based system in terms of who now will defend those rules and how do we band together to defend it. Because on the global stage, there is no police officer. It's always been the global hegemon who has the military or economic weight to decide how it's being imposed. But now we actually have this great opportunity to think differently about now who is going to be the ones to reinforce it. And it has to be us. It has to be all of us for a more inclusive, resilient, and responsive global order.
Wonderful. Bayo, I saw you took your mic, and I think that's exactly what we are doing now. I would like to ask you now to comment on each other's perspectives and to pick up the points. And as you took your mic, maybe you can start and build on, or what struck you most for what Minh-Thu has said, and what does that mean for what you have said at the beginning, and what does that mean when we look and project that into the future?
Right. Everyone here knows, what's his name? He just turned 100, Sir David Attenborough, right? We all grew up under his guidance, his beautiful voice. One of those documentaries that I love, I remember watching, was when he was explaining this wonderful phenomenon that involves a fungus called Ophiocodiceps unilateralis, okay? Ophiocodiceps unilateralis has been the subject of many cinematic productions, especially one called The Last of Us. Has anyone here watched The Last of Us? Only one person in the room has watched The Last of Us. Oh, 2, 3, okay. Why didn't you raise your hands immediately? The Last of Us, wonderful. Go watch it. It's on HBO. So Ophiocodiceps unilateralis sporulates into the jungle, or into the forest, and each of those spores dances, in the atmosphere until it settles on an ant's head, right? And when it enters the insect's body, something strange starts to happen. The ant becomes no longer an ant. It becomes a zombie ant. This is what biologists call it. Now, keep that in mind as I tell you the story. Is a related phenomenon of ants in a circle. Has anyone here heard of a death spiral? That brother there has heard of a death spiral, that brother there, that sister there. So a death spiral is a situation where ants, they secrete chemicals, semiochemicals called pheromones, right? They're like the GPS system of ants, and they tell them where to go. Ants use this to navigate complexity. But there are such times when an accident happens and the ants collapse into a circle. So they just go around in circles. I can imagine that there are motivational speakers in the ant community urging the ants to get home faster. You know, they're like, you can do it, like we're doing here. You can make it if you try. We need to speed things up. But the ants don't know how to do any other thing except go around in circles. And so they just keep going around in circles. And some of them, most of them, die in the circles out of exhaustion. Does this remind you of any other species? Any, just circles, circles, circles. Now, the only thing that could possibly, one of the many things that could break out, not the only, that could break the ants from their trance is the fungus. Something about the fungus relieves the ant of its choreographies of repetition. I think we are stuck. I think we're stuck as a species. I think we've come to the limits of what we know. I think we've come to the limits even of multilateralism, right? And this is not to critique. I don't do critique well. This is not to critique multilateralism. It is to notice that even the nation state and the global Westphalian order doesn't know what to do against the climatic, civilizational, spiritual underbellies of our modernity. It seems we've come to the very end of what we can do as a species. It seems every time we come against this mountain, we want to throw money at it, or we want to throw capital at it, or we want to throw a new solution. But what if the solution is the problem metabolizing itself as resolution? What if there are other ways to think about this that we don't know how to appreciate yet? So my siblings here on the stage, right, I agree with them. This is certainly a time of disruption. It's just that we are in a machine that metabolizes disruption as solution. So it takes it and makes it a product and immediately engineers continuity. So we say things like, there's uncertainty, but what if we need more workshops? Let's do more workshops, right? Or there is poverty. Let's pump more money into that community. But money is the very engine of impoverishment, right? It seems we just keep going around in circles. I would say that we need a break. And a break is not a call to an alternative. I think the rush to creating an alternative to development only repeats the logic of what we're trying to escape. The exit sign leads to the institution we're trying to exit from. So I don't think the point here is to seek an alternative. I think the issue or the invitation here is to make sanctuary for all those forms of knowing, all those forms of wisdom, all those forms of intelligence, all those forms of absence that we don't know how to hold space for. And that is awkward and it's uncomfortable, but that's the work I think we have to do now as species stuck in a circle.
So we have to stop. Thank you, Bayo. We have a few minutes left. Nathalie, listening to Bayo and maybe also listening to what Minh-Thu has said. What is your takeaway? What do you take out of that? The limits of multilateralism. We have seen we cannot solve this with money. We have a big discussion now at the UN beyond GDP. And Minh-Thu, I would like to comment you on that after that because we don't have much time left. How do we get to this discussion that we stop and that we don't do it differently, but that we rethink profoundly? Because we have now a few years to prepare for post-2030, but we have obviously probably a decade or years ahead on building what could be a new order or a new something, because I mean this period of interregnum will not be over in 2030. I mean, I think for me this is a decade or 2 decades of disruption, creativity, opportunities. So how do we navigate that?
I mean, firstly, I completely agree. I mean, this instinct of continuity is incredibly powerful, right? And so you see with the same, within the same people, this recognition of change, disruption, it will never be the same. And then once you start scratching the surface and you get into the what are you going to do, what are we doing, what should we do, all of a sudden it's kind of more or less of the same, right? Just take, a completely different example, but take the conversation on the transatlantic relationship. Disruption, betrayal, stab in the back. It will never be the same. And then all of a sudden, it's just going to be a kind of perhaps a slightly less sentimental version of the same. And I think, sort of here, the psychologist is with us, but it's this weird combination between too much anxiety on one level, right? I mean, the anxiety that paralyzes, but actually, particularly if we think about institutions and elites, too little anxiety, right? In the sense that there can be that creative anxiety that actually leads you to change, right? But there is too little of that so there's this real disconnect between broader societal anxiety and a lack of sufficient institutional anxiety, which leads to the kind of going around in circles. Just one couple of thoughts on what Minh-Thu was saying, which I thought was extremely interesting, and it really got me thinking, because, of course, norms and power are, in a sense, two sides of the same coin, right? And so it is true that the norms, that the rules, in a sense, exist, and one can believe them notwithstanding, and they're not necessarily connected with the execution, and yet they came about, they were created as the product of a particular configuration of power. So I asked myself, how much of these norms will actually remain the same, and how much of them will be revisited as an inevitable consequence of a reconfiguration of power? And if that's the case, and if there won't be, as there won't be, one, in a sense, policeman that replaces another, but there's going to be a kind of collectivity of policemen or policewomen, where does that leave responsibility, right? Because, of course, if there's one, you kind of know where at least responsibility should lie. But if there's various, it's a much trickier question, I think, to address.
Yeah, absolutely. Where's the responsibility? And you know what I hear a lot, if we go into these discussions of, we have gained a lot for one part of the world, or for many people, with the post-45 world order, right? And we have this international systems of norms and values, yet we need to rethink it. Yet if we rethink it, we have a risk, if this responsibility is not used responsibly, that we lose and go back to, or go into something that is even worse. And I think that contributes to the anxiety. That's what I definitely see when I talk to people. But I also see the anxiety, what you have mentioned, and I think that's really, really important. For some of us, we feel this anxiety leads us to be creative and to think something new. For some, this anxiety creates a complete paralysis and it blocks them. And I think that's also then where we come back to what you have said, Bayo. How can we unblock that, right? And how can we connect in a different way to overcome this anxiety? And I see this anxiety a lot in Europe. I spent the last 20 years outside of Europe, and 2.5 years I came back here. And this anxiety is much stronger here than I've seen it in countries that are maybe even more affected by turbulence since many, many decades. And it was one thing when the war in Ukraine started that people here said, war is back. I said, war never left. War was not in Europe, but it continued in the rest of the world. And I think that's for me also of this order that is crumbling, the opportunity to see that much more global, that we all see we are in the same boat, and we are in the same boat, that's something we should not leave behind, what you said at the beginning. Minh-Thu, we said we cannot solve it with money, and we should not throw more money at the problems. We should not throw more money at development. What should we do?
Money helps.
Money is absolutely essential, but that's not the only ingredient that we need. So I do want to get to your question about development. There's something that the Deputy Secretary General said earlier this morning that I thought was really helpful, because, I was one of the people helping to develop and create the Sustainable Development Goals. And you look back and, early on we thought maybe there would be 10 goals. We eventually had 17 with 169 targets. And in no room can you be in where there isn't somebody questioning, why in the world would you have so many priorities? If everything's a priority, nothing is a priority, and that's the reason why we're in this mess. And the DSG said, you go and tell that to a person who's not able to make ends meet. I'm paraphrasing her, but she said, to the people who are living this, they want to live lives of dignity. Who are we to say you can only focus on survival? What about the thriving side of that? So I think now to your question about where do we go next, and the anxiety that we're seeing now, I think when you look at the SDGs, first of all, that agenda in a 15-year time frame is just not possible. That wasn't really the intention anyway. The original intention was to shift how we think about what's required for human dignity to flourish. It's not just about not dying of a disease that we can prevent. It's about living lives and letting our children live the lives that we know is possible. And so you have to shift that paradigm of what's possible. I think the SDGs have done that. Where we haven't kept up, though, is then who gets to decide on how that's being done. And that is still in this old paradigm of donor aid, of externally defined outcomes, and externally interpreted rules. And that has not kept up. It does take time. So to Bayo's point, we do have to slow down, I think, a little bit. We can't just say, well, that wasn't achieved, so let's just throw the whole thing out. I think what we have to do is be more reflective and say, what then is required? So just in the last few years, you've seen, for instance, countries in Africa saying, global tax rules should not be determined only by the OECD countries. That actually we are the ones who are suffering from not being able to determine what those rules are and how they're reinforced. So then African countries went to the UN and called for a vote to bring the discussion about global tax cooperation rules into the UN setting. And why is that important? Because the UN is the only place where they have a voice, where the global majority have the numbers to secure the outcome that they want. And so sure, it's, for some of those who've retained the power in the OECD countries, it's uncomfortable, but there is constructive discomfort, to use a phrase from this morning, where now you're starting to see, and these negotiations are still going, but countries in the global majority who have been bearing the brunt of these crises saying, we're going to find ways where we can take the authority back, the authority to determine how the rules are then executed. And so I think you're slowly starting to see that. It's not keeping pace with the need to achieve the SDGs by 2030, but what it is doing is shifting what's possible on the governance side of things. So we have, I think, shifted what's possible on how we define development with the SDGs, and now we need to shift what's possible and then how we execute on that. But to your point about beyond GDP and then where we go next, I don't think the post-2030 agenda is just going to be, let's extend the timeline on the SDGs. I think we have to find what are those particular catalytic areas that we know we can make progress on that are not politically controversial. So there are real innovations on global health, on maternal and child poverty, on just a whole range of things that we know we can make a difference on. And if we shift the way we think about human well-being and how we should measure progress, not just on GDP, but broader planetary and human well-being in the frame of a beyond GDP, are ways to do that. But I think we have to think more carefully about how we're executing on it and not just what the goals are going to be.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you, and thank you also to bring it back so concretely because of course the SDGs is something very unique as a framework and how it looked at this interdisciplinary way, but also unpacking what the underlying challenges for that are. I will not summarize this discussion because we will continue this discussion next year at the next HSC, because that's what we have done. We will continue to stop and pause, and we will continue to challenge ourselves to think, and what we will do, we will go and scratch, I like that how you said it, beyond the surface, and we see what is there, and we see what you say, how we unlock all of these things that we know, the knowledge, the indigenous knowledge, the knowledge that is within us, to see how we can think that forward. And I want to thank all of you for having had patience with us because we started late. I hope this sets a bit the scene for you in the next 2 days, the conversations that you will have, but more importantly, how you look at things and what you take away from this conference in terms of course, we need to act and we need to do something, but also to stop and think and rethink. So thank you very much to all of you, and thank you to the three of you for being here and to joining with us.